Good morning, Dan and Amy coming to you live from ServiceMaster DSI in leafy Downers Grove, God's Country, DuPage County, part of our Signature Bank business tour. And we turn our sights to education from pre-K through post-secondary, starting with this momentous vote yesterday, the most important of Mike Pence's political career.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the nomination is confirmed.
And he was smiling, beaming when he was doing it. He said it was the easiest vote he ever had to cast. And later, late last night, she was sworn in by one Vice President Mike Pence.
And then a tear ran down the cheek of Senator Pocahontas. The interesting thing about Elizabeth Warren, since she was one of the more outspoken opponents of Betsy DeVos, is there was a different Elizabeth Warren not so long ago.
Oh, we're going to go back in the time machine?
Yeah, getting the Wayback Machine, that's right. And Elizabeth Warren, when she wasn't a big shot U.S. Senator, co-authored a book called The Two-Income Trap, in which she wrote this: an all-voucher system would be a shock to the educational system, but the shakeout might be just what the system needs. In the short run, a large number of parents would likely chase a limited number of spots, but that would ultimately be replaced in the hierarchy by schools that offer a variety of programs that parents want for their children, regardless of the geographic boundaries. By selecting where to send their children and where to spend their vouchers, parents would take control over schools' tax dollars, making them the de facto owners of those schools. And she went on to write very positively about school choice, which is the education reform movement that Betsy DeVos has devoted much of her life to supporting. But now, as a U.S. Senator, like so many on the left, they're beholden to the teachers' unions. They're just automatons for the whims of the teachers' unions. They're on board for K-12 systems to be set up for the benefit and interest of the adults in the system and not the children. That's what's happened, and we see it, of course, manifest itself at the state level in Illinois. Well, of course, the same thing is going on at the college campus level. And is there anything that can be done about it when education is primarily a state and local issue? To help us answer that question, we're pleased to be joined by Peter Berkowitz, who is a columnist, and he's the author. He's a columnist and author, and he's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution out there in Stanford. Peter Berkowitz, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's good to be with you. Thank you.
You answered the question I posed in an op-ed you wrote in the Wall Street Journal about restoring freedom on the college campus, and you suggest that state lawmakers have a path to reinstituting true academic freedom at state colleges and universities. What is that path?
Yes, the key is to appreciate that public universities are already subject to the First Amendment. They have a constitutional obligation to protect students' right to express their opinions quite broadly. Moreover, not only are the public universities subject to this, but the public universities are funded by state legislatures. So the Goldwater Institute, a think tank in Arizona, last week, with the collaboration of Stanley Kurtz, announced a model legislation that, if adopted by state legislatures, would enable the state legislatures to impel public universities to do what they're already required to do, which is protect the rights and freedom of speech of all those on campus.
So this would be essentially like taking the sanctuary city discussion. Now, this is at the federal level, so you're arguing a state and local, although Greg Abbott in Texas is following suit. Donald Trump saying, look, you want to be a sanctuary city? Well, that's fine, but you're going to risk some federal funding if you do so. And Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, in a similar contretemps with a sheriff's office saying, you want to flout immigration law and not collaborate with ICE, then you're going to lose state funding for your sheriff's office. This is sort of the same thing. If you're not going to comport with the law, then you're not going to be supported by the state.
Yes, I think that's right. Although in a sense it's more modest than those aggressive actions in Texas and and the one that Trump threatened against Berkeley. Again, only requiring the universities to do what they're already required to do, and it would do so, for example, simple measures. The model legislation would require universities to publish a statement affirming that universities are dedicated to the widest possible discussion and debate over ideas, and thereby abolish what is still common, speech codes on campus. The model legislation would also give, and this is quite important, it would give anybody on campus whose freedom of speech rights have been infringed a cause of action in state courts to sue those who had infringed their free speech rights. Again, people will say this is interfering with academic freedom. Nothing could be farther from the truth. This is giving those people whose freedoms have been impaired some opportunity to fight back.
Well, how do safe spaces fit in all this, especially with academic freedoms?
Pardon me, I couldn't hear that.
Oh, safe spaces. You know how universities now have safe spaces. If someone's language or rhetoric is offensive to you and you're scared, you run into a safe space?
Yes, this is a phenomenon that has cropped up in universities in recent years. It used to be, of course, there always was a kind of safe space on universities. It was called your dormitory room. If you didn't want to hear opinions, you could retreat to your dormitory room, and you didn't have to listen. But what's become increasingly common is for universities to establish, in a way, public safe spaces. And the safe spaces are growing and growing. In fact, the logical conclusion of them is that some universities have created what they call free speech zones. In other words, the majority of the campus becomes a safe space where you don't have to listen to opinions that you don't like. And those who would like to explore matters in a variety of angles, they're the ones who get confined to small spaces.
And what about just universities, and this is happening at the K through 12 level too, just trying to crowd out alternative points of view that do not comport with left-wing orthodoxy. So we just won't invite or allow to be invited speakers that are of a particular political philosophy that is at odds with ours or most of our student groups or most of our professorate. That's certainly happening. It happened to me. I mean, it was happening 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago now when I was at Northwestern, and now it's just increased in extreme in the extreme nature of it.
No doubt, it's mushroomed, and the legislation would deal with that problem as well. In addition to providing a cause of action, it would compel boards of trustees of public universities to create a subcommittee. The responsibility of the subcommittee would be to publish a report every year on the state of freedom of speech on campus. The authors of this report would be, for example, compelled to note if no dissenting voices were present. They would be compelled to note if dissenting voices were shouted down. The report would be compelled to note if dissenting voices were disinvited. Again, the spirit of this legislation is the old-fashioned idea that publicity, that sunlight is the great disinfectant. In other words, the legislation is really using the spirit of freedom of speech to promote freedom of speech on campus.
Right. I mean, that's the carrot, and the stick is the funding. I mean, you got to hit people in their pocketbooks for them to really feel it or expose them to liability, as you suggest, through the courts.
Yes, indeed. And, of course, most of the funds from state universities come from state legislatures. By requiring universities each year to publish a report on the condition of freedom of speech, you are actually arming members of the Board of Trustees who actually do the hiring and firing on campus, and you're arming the state legislatures with evidence they will need to actually enforce freedom of speech on campus.
What about at the K through 12 level? We have this story that's bubbling up, becoming really a national story about New Trier High School, which is one of the premier public high schools in Illinois and has a bit of a national reputation. And they're doing this is the second year they've tried to do this, but they're doing it. This race day seminar that's mandatory for all of the high school students that presents one decided version on race relations. Basically, just to kind of sum it up nicely, this is, apologize for being white day, where you bring in all these race-obsessed left-wing cranks to, impose their doctrine on New Trier students and then have them, rinse and repeat by the time they get to college. What about at the high school level that you're seeing, and what can be done there? Something similar?
At high school levels, it will be more difficult, but I'm delighted you mentioned the New Trier case. I've begun to follow it, and I worry that what's happening there really is an outrage against education. I think parents need to get involved. I think parents need to insist strongly that high schools provide education and not indoctrination. If you hear only one side of the argument, you are not being educated. As John Stuart Mill pointed out, as true as he wrote it back in the 19th century, if you know only your own side of the case, you know even little of that. From what I understand of the New Trier case, again, this is an outrage against education.
He is Peter Berkowitz, a columnist and author, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. Check out his op-ed, How to Restore Freedom on College Campuses. Peter, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect.